already have the collar and placket attached to the blouse and the frill gathered up slightly. I'll roughly match the length of the frill to the collar and down halfway down the placket, and I've marked with pins so I can find the notches easily as I pin. There are 5 places on this pattern where I need to match the frill, so I'm going to match first to the left hand side as worn. There's the end of the frill to the notch on the centre front of the collar, and then I will match to the centre back of the collar. Then we move down to the top to the collar notch here. We're matching here, and then also to the top of the placket, and we'll even those out a little bit more later. Then finally match the last one to the notch halfway down the placket. I'm now gathering up the frills to match in between each of the notches. So once it feels like they're even in between, we can start pinning each section. Once it's matching up, I can pin in between. Making sure that my gathers are straight as I pin, parallel to each other, and not getting caught sideways, and evening them out as I go. Keeping them parallel to each other so those gathers aren't getting caught. Just making sure it's even all the way along and straight. You can see that I've gathered up evenly all along here. It's worth noting that little care is needed just on this curve here. That there's a lot more fabric just not catching those gathers. I have pinned at the end here, and I've wrapped my thread in a figure of 8 round to secure it, to stop them coming off the end. And then we'll baste all the way along on the machine, and we're going to baste just inside the stitching line to hold them as close to the stitching line as possible, but so that line won't be visible. Next, we're going to attach the collar and the placket to the inside. These are uninterfaced. We're going to press up the unnotched seam allowance on this placket and the bottom of the collar. This is to make it easier later on to attach it to the inside. I'm using a pressing ruler or hot hammer. We're going to press it up about 8mm, so it's slightly less than the 10mm seam allowance. We just press all the way along. Here's the finished pressed collar and placket. I need to temporarily unfold the end of the collar before pinning. I'm matching the notched end of the placket to the bottom of the collar, but we keep the placket folded, and then we can stitch along the end. Here we have the 2 pieces joined together. I'm now going to lay them over right sides together and match up the notches and pin. As I'm pinning, being careful not to catch the gather sideways underneath. So I've got my center notch matching up, and I can check as I go that they haven't got caught underneath just by lifting up and matching up those notches. Top of the placket and the seam allowance out of the way, and all the way down to the notch in the center and down to the bottom. And then we'll pin in between. And then I'm going to sew 10mm all the way around the curve and all the way down. My top tip for getting a really nice curve on the collar is to mark in the stitching line. You can use a tool like this to mark out the 1cm and just mark in some dots, and then just marking in that seam allowance on the curve. And then you can join up the dots to create the curve, so you've got something to follow to get a really neat curve. So once the collar and the placket are attached, just need to finish the bottom here. This is open, so we're just folding it back on itself. We're going to pin along here, and then once that's pinned, we're going to stitch at 10mm, which would make it level with the bottom of the hem here. Once it's stitched, we can make this corner much neater by just snipping across, and before we turn out, fold, and then just gently pushing out the corner with a point turner, get a really nice point. To create a really nice neat collar, we're going to layer and clip into the seam allowance. Layering is when we trim one or more layers to help it to sit nice and neatly. On this occasion, I'm going to trim back the interfaced layer. Sometimes we will actually do the layer on the inside if it's a bulkier fabric to help it to sit with the steps to the inside. For the layering, I'm going to use applique or duckbill scissors. You can use a regular scissors, but this scissors makes it really easy to lift up the top layer and only cut the layer at the top. So we place it underneath the first layer, and we're going to trim by half all the way around. And you can see the scissors is lifting up that top layer, making it easier to cut. Once it's all layered, we're going to clip into the curve to allow it to open up nicely. I'm going to do little snips with the scissors, using the tip of the scissors, not this part here. Much safer to just use the tip. And we're going to snip up to, but not through, the stitching line at regular intervals, just up to the stitching line, so it opens it up. I've pressed my seam allowances in towards the placket, the inner placket, and here on the collar as well I've pressed the seam allowances in, and now we're going to turn out the collar and the placket. And once it's turned out, we can ease those curves out a little bit further by using a tool gently, just to ease out the edges. I have the blouse laid down flat, right side up, to pin the collar to the inside. Make sure that the collar is flat to the back. You can put a few pins just to hold it in place at the back, through the middle. And then we're going to carefully pin through the seam line horizontally, right through that seam line, to try and catch the collar on the back. And we should have a little bit over. And I'm going to continue along that line and just checking that we're catching on the back each time. Once that's all pinned, I can check that there aren't any puckers or folds underneath, and then we're going to stitch in the ditch through that stitching line, as close as possible to the stitching line, all the way along here and down the front placket. And we can check regularly by keeping your needle down, just lifting to check that you've caught it on the other side. And that's the placket and collar all ready for the buttonholes and buttons. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe to our channel. You can find more tutorials over on the blog, which is linked below.